It was the summer of 1979, when the idea of going on a camping trip was first mentioned in a conversation. Mark, a close friend of mine since high school, had been complaining about his job for weeks. He was doing a boring desk job at an insurance company, and Joey, our mutual friend, and I weren't any better off. I was hopping between temp jobs, and Joey was working in a warehouse, moving boxes for minimum wage. We really wanted to escape from everything. Just something to break up the boring routine of working or wandering around. But obviously, we didn't have money to fly to the Bahamas or the time off to take a long road trip. So in the end, we decided to go camping. After some discussion, we chose Harold Parker State Forest as the destination. It's only about an hour's drive north of Cambridge. Close enough to be convenient, but far enough and big enough to feel like a real escape into the wild. And when I say it's big, I mean it. Over 3,000 acres of pine and oak, and it takes 6 to 7 hours to walk across on a good day. We knew that because we had been there once before, on a day trip a few years back. So we thought 3 nights in early fall would be perfect, before the weather turned too cold and too wet. As the date got closer, we began planning in more detail, pooling our money to keep costs down. My old rusted blue hatchback barely passed inspection, but it was good enough to make the trip. Mark managed to dig out his dad's ancient 2-man tent from the garage. It was still in decent shape, even though there were a few patched holes. But since that tent only fit 2, Joey brought along a small 1-person tent he had bought cheap at an Army-Navy store. We split the rest of the gear: sleeping bags, a cooler, and some basic cooking tools. Joey brought a fishing rod, and I grabbed a couple of tarps in case it rained. Mark got a map of the park, one of those foldable pamphlets you can still get at the park's welcome center. After that, we figured we were all set. I remember the drive being really fun. We left on a Friday afternoon. The sun was still high in the sky when we blasted Going Up the Country and Born to Be Wild on the car stereo. About an hour later, we rolled into the forest, just as dusk started to settle. The gravel lot near the entrance only had one other car in it. After dropping a few bucks into an envelope at the small wooden self-service kiosk, we picked a campsite near a place called Berry Pond. It was a flat clearing surrounded by tall trees, with a fire ring already set up. The ground was covered in pine needles, and through the trees, maybe 50 yards away, the water of the pond shimmered in the light of the setting sun. It was beautiful when I think back on it. We unloaded the car, hauled our stuff over to the site, and then got to work setting up camp. That first night was great. Mark got the fire going with a lighter and some crumpled newspaper he'd brought. Then we cooked the hot dogs on sticks and heated the beans in a dented pot I'd found in my mom's basement. The food wasn't exactly gourmet, but out there it tasted better than I expected it to. After we finished the hot dogs, we cracked open the beers and sat on the log we'd dragged over to the fire. I leaned forward, just kind of staring at the flames, and felt the stress melting away from me. I thought, this is exactly what I needed. The next day, we decided to do some exploring. So we picked a 3-mile trail that looped around the pond and led up to an overlook. The path was narrow, and the woods were alive with the sounds of leaves rustling overhead and squirrels and animals darting through the underbrush. And the view from the overlook was well worth the hike. The forest stretched out before us under the morning sun, and we sat there for a while, passing around a bag of trail mix, dumbstruck by how beautiful everything was. It was all just so peaceful. And even though the forest looked wild and untamed, we felt safe. but we were wrong to feel that way. Sunday started just the same. We hiked again, a longer trail this time, and then got back to camp in the late afternoon. Tired, but very satisfied. Mark napped in the tent while I gathered more wood. Then, after eating, while the sun was setting, we figured that we had to sleep early since we were so beat from the day's hike. With Joey's tent just this dark lump nearby, I zipped up our own, and then as I got into my sleeping bag, Mark was already snoring beside me. The forest went quiet, just the occasional sound of an animal, and then I drifted off to sleep. But I remember waking up, cold. The air in the tent felt wrong, damp and cold. I fumbled for my flashlight, clicked it on, and saw the flap was unzipped. I sat up and shone the light around. Mark's sleeping bag was empty, and his boots were gone, but his jacket was still there, wadded up in the corner of the tent. I checked my watch, and it was just after 4:30 a.m., so I figured he'd gone to take a piss somewhere and would be back any second. I lay back down and waited a minute, but there was nothing but silence. Another minute went by. No whistling, no footsteps, nothing. After another minute, I sat up again, clicking my flashlight back on. As I shuffled toward the flap of our tent, I peeked outside. It was pitch black out there. The darkness just swallowed up the beam of my flashlight as I scanned for any sign of Mark. I moved it one way, then another, but there was no trace of him anywhere. I felt kind of silly as I climbed out of my sleeping bag. Something like, was I really that much of a wimp that I gave myself the creeps over nothing more than a friend going to the bathroom? And as I put on my boots, I figured I'd probably get no more than 10 feet before I'd spot Mark returning, and I'd have to explain what a little scaredy cat I was, getting the willies over him going wee-wee. But this other voice in my head kept speaking over the others, asking, but what if you don't? What if he's in trouble? And after pulling on my jacket, I climbed out of the tent and stood up, turning around in a circle with my flashlight in my hand. I was ready to see him walking back, but when I didn't, I took a few steps before calling out Mark's name. Kind of low at first, so as not to wake Joey unless it was absolutely necessary. I circled the campsite, shining the light into the trees, but when I saw that there was nothing but shadows, I started to get this really bad feeling that something was wrong. I called out Mark's name again, louder that time, and that's what woke Joey. I heard rustling in his tent before he unzipped it, and I turned, trying not to blind him with the flashlight. He just blinked up at me, hair all a mess, and then asked what was going on. We went through this whole back and forth of me telling Joey that I thought Mark was missing, him asking if Mark wasn't off taking a pee, and me assuring him that I wasn't just being a pansy. Then, once he was convinced something was wrong, Joey put his boots and jacket on and then climbed out of his tent. We went off searching in different directions at first, circling the campsite in a wider berth while calling out Mark's name. My flashlight cut through the dark, picking out tree trunks and bushes, but no sign of Mark. When we met back at the campsite, Joey suggested Mark might have been sleepwalking. Apparently, he'd done it a few times as a kid, and that one time he made it all the way downstairs and into his backyard. I doubted it, but we widened the circle anyway, moving deeper into the woods. Only this time, we agreed to stay together. As we walked further and further into the woods, the ground began to slope downward, with loose roots threatening to trip us up with each step into that darkness. My feet and socks were already soaked, and the night was so chilly that my hands shook holding that flashlight. The forest felt even bigger now, denser and harder to navigate. But still, we pushed on, yelling for Mark as we went. After about an hour of what felt like walking pretty much in circles, Joey suddenly stopped. He pointed his flashlight toward a bush and something grey that was snagged on it. I aimed my own light, and when I did, my heart sank. We each saw the unmistakable sight of Mark's hat, that faded blue one he'd been wearing the whole trip, hanging from the bush's thorns. We stared at it for a second or two, not moving. Then Joey spoke up, saying it didn't make sense. We kept moving, each calling out Mark's name again. Then, about 50 feet onward, we found his socks, one, then the other, tossed aside like he'd just peeled them off and left them there. Next, we found his jeans, crumpled in the dirt, then his t-shirt, and then his boxers, all spread out over the course of maybe 50 to 60 yards and on a very deliberate path. Each of us started trying to make sense of what we were seeing, with Joey asking if I'd seen Mark drinking any liquor or using anything stronger. We drank all the beer we had with us on that first night. But even though I didn't like seeing him drink any, there was no guarantee Mark hadn't been sneaky with a secret fifth of bourbon or something. But even if he had gotten drunk out of his mind in secret, he wasn't the kind of guy to go streaking through the woods in the middle of the night. That just wasn't Mark's brand of humor. I guess we went back and forth like that for a few seconds, carried on calling out Mark's name as loud as we could. And then, I think maybe a minute or so later, we saw it. Just ahead of us, lying chest up on the ground, was the lifeless, decapitated body of a young man. Blood soaked the ground around it, having poured from the stump above his shoulders. The cut looked clean and straight too, and the rest of the body looked untouched. No marks, no wounds, just pale, unblemished skin, bright white in the beams of our flashlights. I think I kind of just shut down for a second or two. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. And it's weird to think about all these years later, but there was a moment where I thought to myself, is this even reality? I didn't think it was a dream, or that I might be hallucinating or anything like that. It just looked fake to me. I guess my brain refused to accept what I was seeing for a second, and had me thinking it was some kind of movie prop. The way the bright white skin had this almost bluish tone to it, or the way all the blood had sort of congealed around the neck wound and made it look like plastic. I'd never seen a dead body before, so I guess I had no idea what to expect. But for the life of me, I didn't expect to see all of that. I guess Joey had a similar kind of reaction. He didn't think it was Mark, or at least he didn't want to think that it was Mark. And I'll never forget the deep feeling of hurt that I felt when, instead of accepting it, Joey carried on calling out his name. Joey yelled, louder and more frantic, over and over, pacing around that body but never looking at it. He kept saying it wasn't him, that it couldn't be. His voice kept cracking as he spoke, and I just stayed frozen. The flashlight, I remember, trembling in my hands as it slowly just sort of sank in for me. That was Mark, the height, the building. No tattoos or scars. It had to be him. And besides, all his clothes were lining the forest just a few yards away from us. My throat closed up as I tried to get the words out. In the end, I had to force them out, saying, "Joey, it's him. It's Mark." He shook his head, saying no over and over. He still wouldn't look at the body. He just paced back and forth, hands on his head, as tears welled up in his eyes. I said it again, louder, angrier, my voice trembling. "Joey, it's him." And he stopped yelling and just started sobbing into his hands. My legs felt weak, but I couldn't sit. I did the only thing I could think of. which was walk over to Joey and try to console him. Once Joey's cries had quieted to just gasping, I held him while saying, "We gotta do something, man. I know it's messed up, but we gotta do something." Once he calmed down enough to understand, we made our way back to camp as quickly as possible, even running at some points where the ground allowed us to. I don't know why we did that, looking back on it. Maybe it was just to feel like we were helping in some way. But by then, time wasn't an issue anymore. Our friend Mark was gone, and he was never coming back, no matter how fast we ran. Once we were back in my car, we took off along that road until we reached Middleton. Then, after turning left toward Ranger HQ, there it was ahead of us. There were only 2 rangers manning the place since it was still before 6 a.m. But after we stumbled in, panicked, grief-stricken, they gave us some cups of coffee and let us tell our story. Joey did most of the talking, and his voice was an absolute mess. But I did my best to help him out whenever he stumbled over his words. They asked us questions we could hardly answer, and we gave up trying to explain and just begged to let us show them. The sun was coming up by the time we got back to our campsite, and everything looked just as it was when we left. And from there, we walked the accompanying ranger out to Mark's body. And when he saw it, all he could do was tighten his jaw. He then turned to us, narrowing his eyes, and asked, "What happened?" I said we didn't know, that we just found him like that. Joey nodded, and at that point, his voice had gone hoarse already. The ranger just stood around, asking us a few more questions, but it slowly dawned on me that whatever we said, he was not buying it. He didn't act hostile in any way. There was no pushback at all, in fact, but something about the way he acted told me that he didn't believe us. He got on his radio and called it in. 1 body decapitated, 2 witnesses. Then he told us that we weren't free to leave yet, and we were to wait back at our camp. EMTs eventually got there. Then the cops followed in 2 cruisers, their lights flashing silently. I remember they split us up, me by the tents and Joey near the pond. And then they started to question us. Where were we when it happened? What did we hear? Did Mark have any enemies that knew about this trip? Their questions came on thick and fast, but there was no sympathy or comfort offered. They thought we did it, and I could see it in how they treated us. After we were done talking, we were told that they'd have to bag everything up as evidence. And when I say they took everything, I mean they took everything. Our clothes, our gear, the cooler, both tents, all 3 sleeping bags, and the little knives that we'd used for cooking. We didn't object to any of it. We knew that we'd done nothing wrong, and we just wanted to go home. Once the 2 cops had finished questioning me and Joey, they talked amongst themselves for a while. Then they told us that we better head to the station with them. "You're not under arrest," they said. "We just want to question you someplace we can properly record it." Again, we hadn't done anything wrong, so we didn't object. They drove us to the precinct before putting us in separate rooms, and those interrogation rooms were small and grey, with a metal table and a 1-way mirror. A detective sat across from me with a notepad out, asking the same things the 2 uniformed cops did, over and over, just in different variations. I told him everything that happened that night, from me waking up to seeing the flap was open, then the search, the clothes, and the body. When I finished, the detective leaned in and then asked, "Did you and Mark fight? Were you jealous or angry with him for any reason?" I said no, and it was a forceful one too. Me and Mark were friends, best friends. The detective didn't blink. He just wrote it down, and then started off on the same old line of questioning. Where were we when it happened? What did we hear? Did Mark have any enemies that knew about our trip? A few hours later, they let both me and Joey go. He got pretty much the same hotbox treatment as I did. And by then, he'd also realized that the eye of suspicion was firmly upon us. We were scared, really scared, and each of us imagined some botched trial that'd see both of us wrongly convicted of first-degree murder. But even when faced with such a terrifying prospect, our fears were still dwarfed by the horror of what in God's name had happened to our friend Mark. It still doesn't make any sense to me. Even all these years later, if we'd come across him lying there dead from a single gunshot or stabbed to death, but fully clothed, that would have been bad enough. But then, how'd he end up taking his clothes off like that? And who took his head? And why? About a week after we were questioned, forensics came back clean. It was good news, but neither me nor Joey ever felt like celebrating it. There was still the matter of Mark's death, and more importantly, who the hell killed him. But after many, many months of obsessively investigating, the case eventually turned cold. The cops had no weapon, no motive. And there was another thing that stayed missing: Mark's head. Cops and rangers searched the area around the scene for days, hoping it'd turn up someplace. But it didn't. Whoever killed him had taken it with them. It all feels like a lifetime ago. Joey moved west about a year later, got a job out in Oregon somewhere. We don't talk a lot these days, but we do keep in touch. We just don't talk about what happened. I stayed around Cambridge, but I fell apart for a while. I couldn't hold down a job, even stuff like stocking shelves or driving delivery. I'd just blank out mid-shift, see Mark's body again and the blood soaking in the dirt. And then I'd disappear from whatever I was doing and drink. Days were bad, but the nights were worse. On the off chance that I was sober when I fell asleep, I'd inevitably see Mark walking away from me through the woods, stripping as he went. I'd run after him, calling out his name, but he was never able to hear me. Then when he did finally turn around, he was headless. I'd wake up in a cold sweat with my heart pounding, wondering why I wasn't still back in that tent. Friends eventually drifted off, and my girlfriend too. She stuck around a year and then bailed when I couldn't open up about what had happened and my drinking problem. And I didn't blame her. I still don't. I was a complete mess. Drunk or sober, I'd sit in my apartment, lights off, staring at the wall. And then sometimes, if I had to go out, I'd drive past wooded spots and see the trees, and my grip would tighten around the steering wheel. Years later, I eventually hit rock bottom. I lost another job, stopped leaving the house, and stopped eating altogether. I lost a bunch of weight. My sister dragged me to a doctor who put me on meds, and they dulled the edges. But the nightmares just didn't go away for a long, long time. She found this therapy program, cognitive behavioral, a pretty intensive one too, and I started in the spring, twice a week. Those shrinks were good. They didn't push too hard. And one of them said writing something could help. Force yourself to face it. Don't bury it. Lay it all out, all the details. Maybe it'll lose some of its power over you. And it worked. Better with time, just not by much. Mark is still gone. His case has stayed cold, and no one has ever found his head. Who took it or why? I don't go near that state forest anymore, or any wooded area at all for that matter. And while I'm better than I was, I'll never be the same person I was before. The old me stayed out there in that forest, in the exact spot where we found Mark's headless body. And just like my old high school buddy, he's never coming home.